after 2013 than a 2011 when he was the player of the year.
Yep.
He had his first Pro Tour top 8 early in the year at Pro Tour Montreal, at Pro Tour Gatecrash, then had his first Grand Prix win, and then a week later had his second Grand Prix win, and he is already underway in 2014. He's 1 for 1 in Tournaments 1. As we're going to start things off, Owen Turtenwald is going to play Volcanic Island to play Lightning Bolts, taking out a Deathrite Shaman.
And this is, the addition of Deathrite Shaman to these Esper Blade decks obviously changes them quite a bit. More taxing for opposing removal. These Bolt decks used to just be able to keep Stoneforge Mystic in check with Lightning Bolt. Now, additional necessary targets for removal.
David's deck has the 4 main deck Force of Wills. We've seen a lot of players put some number of them in the sideboard. As he shows us his hand, didn't really help there, but we saw a sort of Feast and Famine.
A Scrubland, I believe, was among the cards.
Yep. Sort of Feast and Famine, not going to be particularly relevant in this matchup, as it is the 2 colors that Owen doesn't have in his deck.
Correct.
So David is going to use a Brainstorm and a Fetch Land to be able to shuffle away some of the cards that he didn't want so much in his deck.
Owen playing a list of... the main deck appears basically identical to his Grand Prix winning deck. It's possible the sideboard's changed by a card or 2, but certainly sticking what he knows. You see David here, main phase of the Fetch Land activation, playing around a potential Stifle, which Owen does not play, but also potentially opening himself up to a Wasteland.
Yeah. Stifle's gotten a lot worse with the increase in the number of fair decks, not only True Name Nemesis decks, but also Death and Taxes, which we've already seen Andrew Shroud playing today, as Owen drops a Delver of Secrets on turn 2. Both players have the full 4 Force of Wills, but in these fair matchups, the Force of Wills aren't as important.
Well, a lot of the time you actually can push through very powerful spells early, particularly Stoneforge Mystic unchecked can win the game. But yes, in general, it's a struggle to use Force of Will effectively.
Yeah, depending on how this game ends up, if Owen ends up becoming more of a tempo-style deck, then the Force of Will have a lot more value, as we see Swords to Plowshares taking out the Delver Secrets with the trigger on the stack. So Owen could reveal the card on top of his deck if he so chose, but he is not going to do that, most likely. He is going to look, though, and decide if he wants to shuffle it away.
So you see David timing the spell on the upkeep there. As Owen passed with all of his, with some mana available, he didn't want to play into a counterspell that Owen could cast, so if Owen did want to counter something, he'd have to spend the mana on his own turn.
Right, he couldn't play something like Spell Pierce, for example, as Owen is going to have himself a Brainstorm. And speak of the devil, there's a Spell Pierce as well as a Wasteland and a second copy of Spell Pierce off of that Brainstorm. The Brainstorm Fetchland interaction is the main interaction in Legacy. It's really what makes the format tick. And I think a lot of people really enjoy the fact that they can not have to keep an opening hand that's completely perfect and be able to mold it throughout the game.
Right. It's also, that interaction is also the reason that you see plenty of the names you recognize at 5 and 1.
Yes, absolutely. Being able to correctly brainstorm is one of the biggest skills in Legacy, as we see Owen Turtenwald using a Wasteland to take out Underground Sea. In response, David is going to float most likely a blue mana here. Nothing becomes of it, though, and David moves back to his turn with, doesn't look like any sort of permanent-based action other than, I think he shuffled away that sort of Feast and Famine, so he's just going to sit back and play the control game, which Owen, I think, is perfectly fine with doing also. Oh.
The pacing of the game right now is definitely favoring David. Owen needs to find a threat card fairly quickly, as the longer this game drags out, the more David's going to be able to hit his land drops, start landing things like Jace the Mind Sculptor and similarly powerful cards.
Yeah, if both decks have Stoneforge Mystic, both decks have True Name Nemesis, but David's high-end stuff is much more powerful in a vacuum than Owen's Dazes, for example.
Yes.
Which are still live against a Jace the Mind Sculptor, but as the game draws out and he gets maybe 5 or 6 lands in play, it's going to be a lot more of an issue. As David plays his 4th land.
The threat of Jace and the value of Snapcaster Mage are two things that loom over Owen here. And there's only 10 creatures in Owen's deck, mind you. He's cheating that number to some extent with Ponders and Brainstorms, but not actually a lot of things that he can attack with, although it appears he has just picked up a Stoneforge Mystic.
Yep, so he's going to try to cast the Stoneforge Mystic. Arguably the best Squire in Legacy, although Deathrite Shaman is part of the format now.
Yep.
And that is going to resolve and go get Batterskull, as it so often does. This is the deck that Owen used to win Grand Prix Washington, D.C. He's been playing it in Legacy somewhat, pretty much exclusively. Even before that, a month and a half before that, he played at the Invitational in New Jersey, I believe, as well. Although that might have been right before he started playing it. And he has, much like everything he plays, he knows all of the ins and outs, knows exactly what needs to happen in order for him to win the game, and it's very difficult to beat him on a card-for-card basis because he will always end up just a little bit ahead.
Yeah. So you're saying David in this game being very cautious about playing into Daze and Spell Pierce. He's taking his time trying to be as patient as possible. Instead, in turn, Snapcaster Mage, I assume is targeting, actually, I guess it could be targeting Plow or Brainstorm, but we'll find out momentarily.
Yeah. And the Swords to Plowshares is the target from Snapcaster Mage, and he is going to respond to that with a Spell Pierce. David responds to the Spell Pierce. We have quite the stack happening now. So that Swords to Plowshares that is exiled is actually on the stack. Owen's going to try and prevent that from happening too much.
Yeah, Owen's a little glutted with soft permission here, so he's willing to expend some resources here. The Stoneforge Mystic, if it's allowed to resolve and goes unchecked, could actually carry the game, and Owen's a little glutted with this kind of action.
So David's just going to get 2 lands to pay for the Spell Pierce, and then Owen has a Daze to be able to counter the Swords to Plowshares again. So instead of playing a 1-mana counterspell of his own, David elects to simply pay the mana, which is a 2-for-1 on the one hand, but he also gets to keep the Stoneforge Mystic in play.
Right.
David now gets to untap with all of his mana available, even that Singleton Tropical Island that we see in the Deathblade decks, to be able to activate Deathrite Shaman late in the game to gain life. Deciding how he wants to proceed here, probably wants to play True Name Nemesis.
Yes.
That is going to name Owen Turtenwald, I would imagine, if it is allowed to enter the battlefield. But Force of Will, removing another copy of Spell Pierce, is the response. I would imagine that David wants to try to keep that Stoneforge or the True Name Nemesis in play as long as possible.
Yeah, both players have built up a hand of reactive cards, and now we're seeing the fireworks.
Yep, and True Name does enter play. Snapcaster Mage swings in for 2 to drop Owen down 2 life and get things going. There's another copy of Stoneforge Mystic off the top for Owen Turtenwald. That will be able to get him an Umezawa's Jite, which is very important in racing situations, although it's sort of blanked by a True Name Nemesis on the defensive side.
Yeah, and that's the issue with True Name Nemesis now in these sort of mirror match-ish type of decks, is once one player has True Name Nemesis and the other doesn't, the person with True Name Nemesis completely controls the rules of engagement. They can race or they can hold down the ground as appropriate.
Right, if you think about, Owen is now free to Ethervile in the Batterskull, but it is pretty much blanked by the True Name Nemesis on both sides of the battlefield. It can't block it, and it gets blocked without any life gain.
Yeah, and David completely controls the rules of engagement.
Yeah. David's deciding how he wants to proceed here, and he decides to play a Stoneforge Mystic of his own. Now, with the True Name Nemesis on the battlefield, the equipment become even better.
Yes.
True Name Nemesis is probably the card you want most carrying an equipment, although a 0/0 Germ token is a perfectly reasonable card to carry a Batterskull all on its own.
So Owen wants to put an end to this as fast as he can, although David's in a position where hard casting Batterskull's in the cards, but for the time being, he's going to be pushed off of that as Owen has a Lightning Bolt for the Snapcaster, or for the Stoneforge Mystic, rather.
Yep. At end of turn, Owen himself is going to violin his own Batterskull, creating what is most likely going to be a Brian Brown-Duin token. These are the new tokens for the Open Series, featuring Brian Brown-Duin as a Germ, and also has Huey Jensen, Evan Irwin, Chris Van Meter, and Ari Lax as various tokens from history. The ones that are most likely going to see the most play on Sundays, though, are those Germ tokens, as Batterskull is going to be pretty popular as long as Stoneforge Mystic is around.
I'm guessing that William Jensen's Giant Baiting token will be the least played of the 5.
As an official 4/4 red and green Giant Warrior, I would agree.
Yeah.
I imagine that that Owen himself probably uses them for any manner of tokens. Probably used a bunch of them for pack rats yesterday, for example. So Owen is going to play another Stoneforge Mystic. That's going to get Umezawa's Jite, the other equipment that is commonly played in any Stoneforge Mystic deck.
So David checking Owen's graveyard, presumably to have a sense of how much soft permission he has to play around getting this Batter Skull into play. We know Owen has at least 1 daze, I believe.
Yeah, I think that he still has 1 daze. He did remove the second Spell Pierce to the Force of Will earlier in the game. David can't really go on the offensive just yet because the Batter Skull looms and he can't attack into it. Although he does have that Batter Skull in his own hand to be able to sort of completely switch what's going on. But Owen's got to find a way to punch through the True Name Nemesis before he does anything else. It's going to start by killing a Deathrite Shaman to make sure that he can't just start getting drained.
And until Owen can find his own copy of True Name Nemesis, he's really at the mercy of David's decision making. There's not really a way for him to advance the game, as he can't attack until David gives him permission.
Umezawa's Jite enters the battlefield off of that second Stoneforge Mystic. That's really not going to be able to do anything. It's not going to be able to get any charge counters because whatever Owen puts it on is almost certainly going to get blocked by the True Name Nemesis. So usually that would be able to take out a Deathrite Shaman or something along those lines, but not here. Owen looking over his options. He does indeed have a daze. He also has another land in his hand now.
Owen could also find a flyer in theory.
Yes. Does he have... he has 4 Delver Secrets, but he does not have Vendilion Click, so he doesn't have the end of turn option for that. He is going to equip the Umezawa Jite to one of his Stoneforge Mystics. And we're sort of at parity here. Like, no one can really start taking advantage or leaning on the other player until they find another piece to the puzzle. David wants to find an equipment that he can cast and equip. And Owen, well... What can Owen do with an active True Name Nemesis on the battlefield?
He needs to find his own. They don't moat each other. They just swim past each other.
Right.
So it appears that the board's at parity, but David has far more impactful draws in his deck, and Owen's really leaning on finding either True Name Nemesis or a Delver of Secrets and hoping it sticks.
2 copies of Daze lurk in Owen's hand, and so Thoughtseize is going to be able to take one of them.
You know, we're starting to enter the territory where Jace, a piece of equipment that he can get, you know, if he can get that Batter Skull into play, there's a lot of really dangerous stuff.
Yeah, whereas Owen's 2 True Name Nemesis are pretty much the only thing that swings it in his favor. David has a lot more things that swing it in his favor.
Correct.
Vindicate, any piece of equipment, either sword or Umezawa's Jite, which I'm looking at his list. You know, he actually doesn't have a Jite in the main deck. I didn't even notice that. He has a Batter Skull and a Sword of Feast and Famine in the main deck. The Jite is in the sideboard. So a little bit of a switch from the traditional Esper Deathblade list. Deciding that he doesn't want to have the Jite in the main deck. That's a choice that not many have taken, but at 5-1 is clearly doing him well.
Yep.
And there is Jace, the Mind Sculptor, with 1 mana available, because he knows that Owen has a Daze in hand, and that's going to resolve. So David has another source of card advantage. He can now win with the Jace, if he so chooses. So he is going to activate the Brainstorm of the Jace.
It appears that David, in his cards, has found another copy of True Name Nemesis, which is going to allow him to go on the offensive starting next turn, assuming it resolves.
David does have 3 copies of True Name Nemesis, whereas Owen only has 2. He's also played Brainstorm more times this game, as Jace is going to start playing Brainstorm a bunch. There's an old Magic saying, I guess, that if you activate Jace Brainstorm twice, you just don't lose.
It's pretty challenging.
Yeah. Something went terribly wrong if you've activated a Jace Brainstorm 2 times and then you lost that game. So Owen is going to play out a 5th land, most likely to be able to hardcast Force of Will, which I think is what he drew a turn ago.
No, he's still on.
He's still just on days?
Days in the land.
Oh, okay.
So if I was David,
fair
I'd
enough.
probably test the waters here by seeing if your True Name Nemesis resolves, and if it does, then you can start going on the offensive.
David, I think, is probably pondering whether he wants to activate Jace before he does so to try to find a Force of Will to counter Owen's Force of Will if he happened to draw it so that he can really go on the offensive. But it looks like he's just going to immediately go for the True Name Nemesis. That one's also going to name Owen Turtenwald.
And I think we're about ready.
Yeah, about ready to start. Not really racing, just getting there. Yeah. Finally putting an end to the game. It is each one of those is a 5-turn clock. And so we are going to activate Jace. Finds another Jace, a Wasteland, and a Batterskull, which he put on top last turn. Wasteland is the land drop, and now David's probably going to start going to work into his attack step, I would guess.
He actually still has, given the amount of equipment that Owen has in play, David still has to be concerned about Owen sneaking a True Name Nemesis into play.
Yes.
He's not quite out of the woods yet.
But instead, it's just another Spell Pierce off the top from Owen. Deathrite Shaman is going to speed up the clock significantly, by the way, as it is going to be able to do its Grim Lavamancer impression on one of Owen's Lightning Bolts.
This is part of the reason I do not like the matchup from the blue-white-red Delver player side, is so many of their tools are predicated on being the one out on the front foot, and the Esper Blade deck with its own Stoneforge Mystics and with Deathrite Shaman and with Swords of Plowshare can actually keep up with you in the early game. And then once you start hitting turns 4, 5, and 6, the average Deathblade draw is just so much more powerful than the average blue-white-red Delver draw.
Yeah, David's entire deck is better at playing defense. It can play offense very well. True Name Nemesis, Deathrite Shaman are very capable of ending a game quickly, but they're also capable of either gaining life or standing in front of a Batterskull token or finding something defensive to take care of things, and not so much true for Delver of Secrets.
Correct. No, David really going on the offensive, knocking Owen
to 4 here. Owen's going to be able to, it looks like, get some counters on that Jite as well as attack with the Batterskull.
This is something. Last turn was something of a curious attack there by David. It seemed like he was maybe one turn away from really solidifying things. Now he, may have to block the Stoneforge Mystic, possibly block the Batterskull and have the blocker shoot itself, or plays in that sphere.
Well, we'll see what we got cooking over here as he gets his 6th land to be able to affect the board in the middle of combat. And we're going to lead off with a Brainstorm. It looks like we may have looked at the 4th card on top of our library. I think that's what they're discussing right now, is if David accidentally looked at the card with his Brainstorm. And so we're going to probably wait for the judge to make a decision there. Those deft-eyed viewers of yours may have seen that happen. The top card is the 3rd card that still needs yet to be drawn from the Brainstorm, and the 2nd one on the bottom was the one that was vaguely looked at. There was no other information known about the deck at the time, no Thassa's in play, nobody cast Magma Jet, and so I think that what the judge is going to do is re-randomize the deck and give David a warning.
Yeah, David just shuffled up that fetch land, so there's no order.
So here's the 3rd card from the Brainstorm, and it is a 3rd True Name Nemesis, it looks like. That one was shuffled by the judge, so that's quite a good cut from the judge there.
So David, looks like he's just taking the whole hit here.
Yeah, it looks like he's going to take 5, falling to, he's not going to take 5. He's going to attack the Jace to get that off the board. And the Stoneforge Mystic probably hit David.
So,
or possibly not, it's possible. Nope, it did hit David, so he falls to 11.
So yeah, David possibly a little too ambitious with that attack last turn with the 2nd copy of True Name Nemesis, but still firmly ahead again. He still controls the pace of the game.
Yes. So Owen is going to fall to 6. However, he does have another 4 life in his back pocket with that Jite, so it's an effective 10.
And now Owen deciding at the end of the turn if he wants to do anything, potentially use the Jitte to take down the Deathrite Shaman, possibly gain life right now.
Yep, he can't really take down the Deathrite Shaman sitting at the life total that he's at, as the True Name Nemesis would likely kill him. But, so he's going to leave that life up to be able to gain 4 life burst at instant speed, if he so chooses. Another land from David. No longer has a Jace on the board, but he does have another one in hand if he wants to use it.
Yeah, I think, again, if I'm in David's spot, the first thing you do is just see if this True Name Nemesis resolves. From there, the game gets, your combat gets much simpler. But you need that information first. If Owen's able to keep it off the table, then you probably, again, only want to be sending 1.
Yep, and here is the True Name Nemesis. Owen does have a Force of Will in his hand, in addition to the Spell Pierce and the Daze. So he is deciding how he wants to go about trying to counter this True Name Nemesis. And even if Owen does counter this True Name Nemesis, David already has 2 on the board.
Yes.
And as I mentioned, they are both naming Owen Turtenwald, so he's already in a world of hurt. There's Owen's deck, for all it does really well, it does not deal with a on-board True Name Nemesis particularly well, let alone 2.
Yeah, once it's in play, Owen's 75 is drawing pretty slim. It's basically his own True Name Nemesis, maybe a Delver of Secrets, but the idea of actually killing one is that's not happening.
I guess there's very few ways for a red, white, blue deck to do that.
You could play, there's a card from the dark that gives -1/-1 to
Sure.
I mean, there's some narrow stuff you could
Yeah.
play.
I remember
Flame
playing.
Break.
Yeah, exactly.
But
I remember playing against that card you were speaking of just now in a Pauper game, because it's a common.
So just sending the 1.
In comes the 1 True Name Nemesis.
And I like this attack from David because Owen actually has 2 relevant attackers now, the life gain from Batterskull and also the Jitte on the Stoneforge Mystic. So leave 2 back to prevent Owen from attacking the following turn, and then you have more than enough to take care of the game the following turn.
Owen pondering his decision now. It looks like the True Name Nemesis is probably going to hit Owen down to 2 life. And we'll see if David tries to get a little hasty here and try and kill Owen, not realizing that the Jitte can just gain him life. I don't imagine that's going to happen. This is probably just a well, it did happen.
Well, David is still firmly in the driver's seat here.
Yes.
Make no mistake about it.
Owen's going to stay at 2. The 1 counter was removed from Stoneforge Mystic so that Owen can stay alive.
It's really impressive watching Owen in games like this where he's just dead and he knows he's dead, but he never, not only does he not give up on the game, he continues to play as technically well as possible because you never know when your opponent's going to give you an opportunity to get back into it.
Right. There was already sort of a little bit of an opportunity when David attacked with both of the True Name Nemesis before the 3rd one came down.
It did give Owen a bit of an opening, but that 3rd True Name Nemesis really
It's the
locks it
3rd
up.
one that gets you.
Yeah.
The first 2 just give you time to cast the 3rd one.
Right.
And Owen looked like just drew another land. Nothing really to affect the board, just counter spells and lands at this point.
Trying to figure out if there's something to be done here, or at least continuing to play to see if David will provide information.
True Name Nemesis blocks both equipped creatures. No triggers are going to happen from those equipped creatures.
All right, so Owen is asking a question away from the table. It's possibly about just how both of his cards in play work. They're both predicated on combat damage actually being dealt, the lifelink from Batterskull and the trigger on was Jitte, and asking if protection from a player shuts that down.
Right.
Which for Owen, unfortunately, the answer is yes.
Absolutely. Protection is a keyword from when Magic was invented that makes sense when you think about it, but in terms of the rules of the game is overly complicated.
Yes.
You look at a card like Animate Dead, for example, in the Holiday Cube, and it makes sense. You're like, all right, I'm going to take that creature from the graveyard and animate it. But if they disenchant the Animate Dead, it goes away. but the words get in the way. You have to enchant a dead creature and bring it into play. Very similar to Protection. Protection does a lot of things. It's very complicated for newer players to understand, and even leads to judge calls like this one, where well-read players who've been playing the game for years and years and years, and former player of the years, have questions about how it works. The thing to keep in mind for those at home that are somewhat new is the anagram DEBT, debt. Damage can't be damaged by sources, so he can't be damaged by anything Owen owns. Enchanted can't be enchanted by anything Owen owns. Blocked can't be blocked by anything Owen owns. And targeted can't be targeted by anything Owen owns. So Owen is going to talk to the head judge about the question that he had, so we're going to bring it back to the booth. Ruben Wrestler here with Patrick Sullivan at Star City Games Indianapolis, otherwise known as SCG Brave the Elements. It's quite cold outside.
Yeah, Cedric's on break, like the good soldier that he is, attempted to trek out into the snow to the Steak and Shake to find food for everyone. The Steak and Shake, along with every other local business, is closed due to the weather. So,
yeah, it was open earlier today, but for the safety of the employees, they decided to send everybody home. I know that Cedric in particular is very upset that Noodles and Company holds their employees in high regard and wouldn't let them come out in the level whatever we are snow emergency, which is good for them, of course, but bad for his noodle cravings.
Yeah, the fact that Owen is currently talking to the head judge, I think implies that it may be something beyond some sort of protection pooling.
I agree.
He may be exploring anything else. But anyhow, we're watching that match right there, and we're going to see these, for Legacy going forward, we're going to see a lot of these True Name Nemesis battles, a lot of mirror matches. And what do you think is, kind of the best way to proceed to build your deck to address that matchup, assuming that you want to play with Stoneforge Mystic and True Name Nemesis and you anticipate a lot of other people doing the same thing?
Right. There are sort of three schools of thought as to how to deal with whenever anything new comes into the format, especially for fair decks, like when Deathrite Shaman entered the format or when Stoneforge Mystic entered the format. Whenever anything new, Tarmogoyf, for example, enters the format, there are three ways to attack it. One is use the weapon yourself and win mirrors or pseudo-mirrors. The second is play another fair deck that has a very good chance against that card. And the third is ignore it entirely. So we've seen all three of those, actually. Sneak and Show, Storm ignores True Name Nemesis. Last round, we saw Jeff Hoogland playing a fair deck that has a lot of answers.
Liliana the Veil, Golgari Charm in the sideboard.
Orzhov Pontiff made an appearance, modern all-star. And then the third one is this style of matchup where both players have True Name Nemesis but have different end games deciding how to best use the True Name Nemesis. Personally, I like using the fair cards to take down the other fair decks. That's just always been my style. Although, much like Jeff Hoogland's deck, which has an unfair combo in it, making a 20/20 flying indestructible creature, I also like having sort of two-card combos in my deck. I'm well known for playing Painter Servant Grindstone, for example.
Natural Order Progenitus and things along those lines.
Yeah, exactly. You can still play 1/1s for one and things like that, but in terms of Esper Deathblade versus Blue-White Red Delver, as we see Owen scoop up and they get ready for Game 2, we're being explained that I think that David did not name Owen Turtenwald. So the first two named Owen Turtenwald, but the third one didn't name Owen Turtenwald, and they were deciding how to handle that.
Sure. And I guess the conclusion was that the judge was, given the intent that David showed with the last two True Name Nemesis, that they're just letting him call it that the third one also went there.
And so they're going to head into sideboards now with David Elden up a game on Owen Turtenwald, who is the standard open champion. He is going for the back-to-back that hasn't been achieved since Jerry Thompson did it in, I believe, Pittsburgh. And I think he's done it twice.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if he's done it the second time, but I know for sure he's the one and only person to actually accomplish this.
It's been close a couple times. Will Craddock had a second place in a standard open and then a win in Legacy, so there wasn't the sweat. There have been a couple of first place in standard and then quarterfinals, semifinals in the Legacy, a couple of those, but no one's been able to get first in one weekend.
Yeah.
Since Jerry.
So Owen, Dream on the ropes right here. We'll look at the sideboard here. Very reminiscent of his winning deck from the Legacy Grand Prix in Washington, D.C. not that long ago. He has cut the Wear Tear, which is unfortunate for him in this matchup. He has 4 Meddling Mage, 2 Pyro Blast, a Red Blast, 2 Rest in Peace, 2 Grim Lavamancer, another True Name Nemesis, a Sulfur Elemental, a Sword of Feast and Famine, and a Grafdigger's Cage. I think we can almost be certain that the 2 Pyro Blast and the Red Elemental Blast will be coming in here. I'm not sure if he's going to want Meddling Mage. It is not, he's definitely the aggressor in the matchup, but there are so many overlapping cards between the two decks. He can name Jace the Mind Sculptor. He can name, Deathrite Shaman. We're talking pretty narrow stuff here, but a possible inclusion. And, the rest of the sideboard, maybe he wants to change his equipment slightly with Sword of Feast and Famine, but it feels like Umezawa Jitte and Batterskull are still the best 2 baseline pieces of equipment. And the rest of the cards feel pretty out of place here.
Looking over at David's sideboard, I was referencing how you handle these mirrors of True Name Nemesis, and David has chosen to go with Zealous Persecution, a card that's what has been very popular at various points in its life in both Standard, Extended, and Legacy. Seeing a lot more play in Legacy thanks to True Name Nemesis. I can almost guarantee that those are going to come in. He's got a couple other cards that are good in this matchup in certain spots. I think that, for example, Supreme Verdict is something that I think David's going to be interested in this matchup, particularly with Owen wanting to have the quick Delver draw. Things like Spell Pierce have corner case applications, as well as Thoughtseize and more Vendilion Clicks and the Jitte. But certainly Zealous Persecution, I would imagine the Supreme Verdicts are also going to come in.
Yeah, it's interesting because, David has so many creatures of his own. And you look at a card like Supreme Verdict, and how can you rationalize bringing this card in when you have so many creatures of your own and you have this equipment package and all of this? David can actually win a long game much more effectively than Owen can. Owen's very threat light. David can also just win the game with Jace the Mind Sculptor. And, of course, Owen's trying to protect his stuff with various counterspells, Spell Pierce, and Daze, and Force of Will. So even though it looks a little strange on the surface, I agree that I wouldn't be surprised to see Supreme Verdict come in for the post-board games.
Yeah, David does not have the Zathra Necromancer that the standard Esper deck that runs Supreme Verdict has, so we're not doing the 22 creatures with Supreme Verdict that way. He does have a lot of reason to want to play a much slower game, and so he will often try to save all of his 2-drops and 3-drops until later in the game, until he can Supreme Verdict later on.
So we're going to be holding the match momentarily here, as we have a slight technical difficulty out in the feature bench area. Welcome back, Patrick Sullivan, Ruben Bresler. We're in round 7 of the Legacy Open here in Indianapolis. First open weekend of the new year with our new rollout for organized play and for what the invitationals are going to look like. And Owen, for those of you tuning in a little late, was our standard open champion this weekend. Trying to make it a back-to-back weekend. Don't see that very often. And right now, back up against the ropes against Esper Deathblade.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little bit of a rough matchup, as you mentioned before. That Blue-White Red Delver, this is sort of a deck built. This Esper Deathblade deck is very good against the Blue-White Red Delver deck, as we note on David's note here. He has he specifically notes that he played this deck because of Blue-White Red Delver.
Yes.
So I think that David came into this tournament expecting to play against Blue-White Red Delver, chose this deck specifically so that he could play against the other fair True Name Nemesis decks and be able to one-up them.
Yeah, and he's got all the tools, multiple copies of True Name Nemesis in his main deck. Thoughtseize is to break up opposing True Name Nemesis, more action in the sideboard, and so definitely geared for, prepared for that matchup.
Yeah, so I think that personally the way that I would fight against True Name Nemesis is to play a fair deck that has some unfair element to it that is naturally good against True Name Nemesis decks.
Yeah.
My choice is the Painter Servant deck because you have 8 Red Blasts to be able to counter on the way down and lots of other things like that. What direction do you think you'd go in?
Well, I tried just copycatting Owen's list and lost to Wasteland a bunch, so
sure.
I would have to reevaluate how I want to address the matchup. Probably Sulfuric Vortex and just being happy to race.
Sure.
That's how I would go about it, I think.
That doesn't sound like you. I can't believe that.
Ensnaring Bridge, possibly?
Right. Ensnaring Bridge, I think, is an answer that a lot of people not really stumbled on, but sort of forgot about and then came back to. Ensnaring Bridge, very good right now, also for preventing Emrakul and Gristlebrand from killing you. As we are back underway, Owen is on the play, and he leads with Delver of Secrets off of Tundra.
And we'll see, how David wants to approach this. We saw him last game again be very cautious about playing into Daze and Spell Pierce. How much is he willing to, take some damage here and stun his development a little bit to try to shut down some of the cantrips, some of the soft counters rather, that Owen has access to.
Yeah, the problem with that is that Owen's deck is okay with David waiting a little bit. And so Ponder off of the top, blind flips the Insectile Aberration, and another Delver of Secrets is going to enter the battlefield before David can really do anything, and there's a Wasteland to take out David's land. So the patience not really paying off there.
Yeah, no, this is, you know, very close to an ideal start for Owen here. He's got a lot of pressure going. He's stunted David's development, and David might be in the spot where he has no choice but to potentially play into days here, as he can't just take all these hits.
Yeah, I think that David is almost certainly going to have to play into days here, as we see Pyroblast blind flipping the second Delver. And David is going to take a lot of damage this turn, as I think daze is going to happen right now. So we're going to float a blue, and there's the daze. Countering Swords to Plowshares.
And these are the hallmark Delver of Secrets draws that you're seeing right now.
Absolutely.
A quick Delver backed up by Mana Denial and Soft Permission.
And there's a Ponder to be able to search for even more permission. He finds 2 lands and a True Name Nemesis instead.
And the Volcanic Island, pretty helpful to have here, as it turns on both Pyroblast and the Lightning Bolt in Owen's hand.
Yep, and the Lightning Bolt is going to be able to put an additional turn on the clock. So I think David is now at 11, by the way, which is a lot less than 17.
Yes.
That's a 2-turn clock, I believe, right now, with the Lightning Bolt still in Owen's hand. Doesn't really change too much right as of this moment. David's going to ponder to look for some answers to these Insectile Aberrations, whereas Zealous Persecution doesn't answer them right now, so we'll see how David decides to proceed. He might be trying to find the Supreme Verdicts.
Yeah, or Swords to Plowshare would also be
Right.
a fine draw here.
He doesn't find what he wants on top, so he's going to shuffle it up and get a random one from the box. Could be anything.
Well, there's got to be some pretty specific stuff here.
Right. It should, in order for David to have a chance in this game and not succumb to the tempo draw, it has to be something pretty specific, although it doesn't look like it is.
Deathray Shaman's not shabby here. That's fine. It at least warrants the bull out of Owen's hand.
And so 2 Volcanic Islands total in Owen's hand are going to mean that the True Name Nemesis can come down on turn 3 if he so chooses. Or, sorry, on not turn 3, but land drop 3.
Yep.
But first, 6 damage, dropping David to 5. I think Owen is going to play Ponder first here, finding True Name Nemesis and 2 lands, and he's going to decide to shuffle that away. The True Name Nemesis is not really relevant right now, as Owen is just trying to end this game as quickly as he possibly can.
Yeah. And Owen may not even want to kill the Deathbright Shaman, as there's no creature in the graveyard to gain life with, and he has Pyroblast to check Jace. So.
Yeah, I think that, that at the moment, leaving up the Volcanic Island sounds like a good plan, although...
Supreme Verdict is a possibility in that world.
Yes. So Lightning Bolt is going to take down the Deathbright Shaman, just in case Supreme Verdict or Jace were going to be things. Another soft permission spell from David. That's a Spell Pierce on top, leaving him with Vindicate as an option this turn, and it looks like that is going to happen.
And 9 damage later, the Insectile Aberration is finally taken down.
David not running Detention Sphere in his list, as we've often seen before, as Wear and Tear and answers like that have become more popular, as well as Golgari Charm out of Shardless Bug. So Detention Sphere, not really something people are looking for, although it would have been particularly good right there. Vindicate instead, the old school version, is going to take care of the problem.
And there's a Wasteland there. If Owen wants to, he can take that Wasteland and Wasteland the Scrubland to cut David off of white, closing another out potentially.
Yeah, it looks like that's probably what's going to happen here. Play around Daze first with this other Delver of Secrets. That's number 3, and he's going to take out the white source, removing not only Swords to Plowshares, but Wrath of God, and hey, there's the Swords to Plowshares right off the top.
But that requires David to crack a fetch line, it appears, which knocks him down to 1, and then the Delver, flipped or otherwise, can finish off the job.
The Human Wizard would be able to finish off the job instead of just the Insect Human. And David does not find what he needs with the Brainstorm, and we're going to go to game 3. So, Owen Turtenwald able to use one of those hallmark Delver of Secrets draws with the tempo counter spells to be able to put the game away in short order.
So lean and so efficient.
That's right. Game 1 took about 35 minutes. That's where David wants to be. Game 2 took about 7 minutes. That's where Owen wants to be.
Although, keep in mind, David actually has, some of the same capabilities to win a relatively fast game, especially if he has a turn 1 Deathbright Shaman that Owen can't kill. You can actually get out in front pretty fast. You can have an unchecked Stoneforge Mystic. You can ramp into a fast Chase or a fast True Name Nemesis. So certainly the longer game favors David, but he's not completely helpless in the slower games either.
Right. We haven't seen a turn 1 Deathbright Shaman yet from David, actually, and so Owen has not had to deal with it. And had David had a turn 1 Deathbright Shaman that game, things might have been a lot different, as Owen only had the 2 Delvers as early action.
Yeah, I believe it's possible David actually did have a turn 1 Deathbright in the first game, but Owen was able to break serve with a Bolt.
Right.
But in any case, he
game 1 he was able to have the Bolt to answer it.
Certainly he has not had an unchecked Deathbright Shaman yet.
Sure. And so we're going to go to game 3. What do you think about, is there any difference that you would be on the play or the draw in this matchup? For example, Daze is a card that's often brought up when one player's on the play and one player's on the draw.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the hallmark, but I think Owen's deck is much leaner and more efficient and low to the ground, and David has a bevy of relatively expensive cards. I still think Daze is worth keeping in.
Yep, a deck that has 3 Jace the Mind Sculptors and 3 True Name Nemesis. Certainly Daze is still an option, not to mention the elimination spells that David is running.
Now, that said, of course David can definitely get out in front of Daze, especially, again, if he has Deathbright Shaman, but I still think there's merit to Owen keeping it in his deck.
Owen Turtenwald, as you see, currently the 11th ranked player on the StarCityGames.com Players Championship leaderboard. That is what that little 11 in parentheses is referencing. Several players in the top currently ranked in the top 16 are in the room. BBD, of course, the 2nd ranked overall player. We've also seen Chris Van Meter. Laura Nolan is stomping around. I think he's around 20th right now.
Andrew Tenjum.
Andrew Shrout also near the top of the standings, and you can see the whole standings at StarCityGames.com/Players Championship, I believe.
Sounds right.
And if not, you can also follow the hashtag on Twitter at #SCGPC. I will be doing a brief recap of the movers and shakers of the previous week's open points in my preview articles going forward as we see turn 1 Deathbright Shaman, as we were just talking about. Let's see if it can survive this time. Does not look like it's going to, as Swords to Plowshares is going to turn it into a farmer.
Although even that represents a small victory for David, as Owen did that in lieu of casting a Delver on the first turn.
Yeah. David looks like he drew Snapcaster Mage for the turn. Wasteland is going to take out Tundra. And he's just simply going to pass, hoping that Owen had a land light keep. But it's going to be Wasteland and Wasteland to start the game, and we're back where we once were.
These decks are both relatively land light, and we see these a lot in the tempo matchups amongst honest decks and Legacy. Often they become these occasionally grueling Wasteland battles.
It looked a little bit like Owen sort of stole the play in this game with that Wasteland taking out a dual land, Wasteland taking out a dual land, and then David couldn't play anything. He only played a land, and then Owen was able to play a turn 4 Delver that was very similar to a turn 1 Delver, or turn 3 Delver that was very similar to a turn 1 Delver. It did not blind flip this time. He had enough fortunateness in the last game, I guess, and so it's going to stay a 1-1 for now. Owen does have another fetch land in his hand if he decides to play it this turn. He's probably trying to bait out a counterspell from David here.
Or at least set up his hand a little bit if he's committed to, playing the fetch land regardless. It looks like Owen has also brought in Grim Lavamancer for additional threats and additional answers to Stoneforge Mystic.
Yep, Grim Lavamancer also a good answer to Deathbright Shaman, as it's able to respond to the Deathbright Shaman activation by removing the cards that it was targeting with its cost rather than the effect.
Yeah.
Looks like Owen's going to put back at least one of the lands with his Brainstorm, attacking in for 3. And Owen uses Scalding Tarn. He's going to go probably play this Grim Lavamancer pretty quickly, trying to put this game away.
Yep.
David, sorry?
David with some pretty clear colored mana issues at this point.
Exactly right. He does not have access to white mana right now, which is a bit of a problem for him, as he has a hand full of white spells, although looks like Polluted Delta is going to be able to solve some of those issues, at least right now, playing one white spell.
But, you know, again, David again has shown a propensity to play around days as much as possible, but his hands may be tied a little bit here. He's behind on the board. Owen's threatening a lot of damage between this Grim Lavamancer and this Insectile Aberration, so he may simply have to throw caution into the wind and start casting things.
And so Polluted Delta gets Scrubland there. Scrubland is going to cast Swords to Plowshares, targeting the Grim Lavamancer. So to be able to take out the repeatable source of damage, it doesn't need the combat step.
Maybe trying to free up some other creature in his hand?
Yeah, probably. Although he can't cast it this turn, he does have Stoneforge Mystic in his hand. Speaking of Stoneforge Mystic, everybody's favorite Core Artificer makes an appearance in Owen's hand for his draw step, if he chooses to play it as well. If you're Owen, you've got these reactive counterspells to be able to protect the Insectile Aberration, but you also have a Stoneforge Mystic. Do you try to trot out the Stoneforge Mystic this turn?
I think so. You still have days to cover yourself, and more importantly, David could very easily have another copy of Source of Plowshares in his hand. He's just received white mana for the first time, so there's no guarantee that you've bled out all of his removal.
Owen ponders into a bunch of non-lands that are repeats of cards that he already had in hand, like Stoneforge Mystic, and so he is going to elect to shuffle with the Ponder. Ponder, Preordain, and Brainstorm are all very similar, but very different in terms of which decks want which.
Yep.
Ponder allows you to see more cards, and with Owen's deck that wants to have specific cards in specific matchups, it's one of the better options.
Yeah, Preordain's a little, you look at fewer cards, but you have a little bit more control of the selection. So for certain combo decks, it's better to have.
Yeah. And Brainstorm, of course, much better when you have a fetch land. Also, being the only instant of the group is a much more surprising effect. All three, very good, though. I suggest everybody play those if you get the chance, because they are tons of fun. David Elden, pondering his decision this turn.
This would be a good spot for Supreme Verdict, that's for sure.
Yep. And there is another white mana. Let's see if he has the Supreme Verdict, or if he brought it in, for that matter. True Name Nemesis is instead what David decides to do, and it immediately resolves, probably naming Owen Turtenwald. And at this point, it's not as relevant as it was when it first made an appearance in the last game, or in the game one, I should say.
Although Owen is potentially, I mean, he has a Spell Pierce and a Daze to protect himself, but now equipment starts mattering quite a bit, potentially.
Yes. Stoneforge Mystic fetches up Batterskull, preparing for a longer game if he so needs to, is Owen Turtenwald. That Batterskull is also going to prevent the True Name Nemesis from really attacking. Owen gets to lean on his advantage a little bit if he gets to especially if he gets to untap with the Stoneforge Mystic, as he does have the 3/2 flyer, the Wasp Lancer, just sitting there pecking away every couple turn, or every turn, for 3 damage. Swords to Plowshares targeting Stoneforge Mystic, sending Owen up to 21, means that that Batterskull is not going to be on the menu in the near future. But David's might be.
And now this is dangerous territory for Owen if David has brought in Umezawa's Jitte.
There is a Zealous Persecution on the bottom, by the way. We were referencing it earlier. David's deciding which equipment he wants to go for, and he is going to choose Umezawa's Jitte.
Now, if Owen is able to flip this Delver this turn, it's likely to be too slow, but otherwise, this could be a real problem for Owen.
Yep. I did not see if Owen had a Bolt. Did you see if he had
did not.
one?
He has a Daze, a Pierce, a Stoneforge, and the equipment he just searched for.
So the Pierce is not going to be relevant. The Daze is not going to be relevant if that Stoneforge Mystic loses its summoning sickness.
This is a big flip here for Owen.
Yep. And he does not get it. It is another land. So, can Owen finish the job before Jite starts going to work?
That was a critical flip there that Owen just missed.
In comes Insectile Aberration, dropping David down to 8. And Stoneforge Mystic. Another one from Owen Turtenwald. This one is also likely to go get Umezao's Jite.
And you see, if you look at Owen 75, you know, he's not really made any special concessions to True Name Nemesis. He has a couple red blasts on the board, which he wants anyway. He has the basic structure of his deck, but his list is quite exposed in situations like this.
You know, I was looking at lists of Blue-White Red Delver, and it occurred to me that perhaps if your opponent has a creature that has protection from you, perhaps you should gain protection from that creature. So I wanted Ruined Halo in my sideboard, but I haven't seen that one pop up yet. It's just a thought that I had that occurred to me.
It's been vetted around my office a little bit.
Yeah? Nice.
Yeah, there's been some Ruined Halo chats.
Good to know. David now has 4 untapped mana, access to 5. He also has the True Name Nemesis that he's going to be able to start to leverage here with his Umezao's Jite, because he can sneak it in off of Stoneforge Mystic without the worry of a counterspell. Deciding if that's the path he wants to take, he probably has some other decisions in his hand.
Well, the big one here is there's some pretty big upside to him leaving his Stoneforge Mystic untapped. Activating is actually kind of a cost here, as he could really use an additional blocker, but the risk of Owen having
a counterspell
is just too high here. I like this path from David.
Absolutely, and the True Name Nemesis picks up the Jite. The Jite picks up the 2 counters.
And now Owen's really under the gun here.
Yep, Owen really needs to flip this, and he does not do it. So,
trying to see what he drew there. Was it his own True Name Nemesis, perhaps?
It might have been. I think it was.
That's a big draw here. David's still, you know, his life total is pretty precarious at this point.
Yeah.
And that Jite is going to be taxed containing Owen's board, so.
Now the other option here is that Owen does have the Jite in play already. So if he tries to simply equip up a creature, he's not going to do this, but he could pay the 4 mana, get one of his creatures dead or dying, and then put it on another one and start getting counters on his own Jite. Not ideal, as he decides to see where he's at before he moves through combat. David takes 2 from the pair of 1-power creatures and kills off the 3/2 flyer. And now, True Name Nemesis is going to hit the board. This True Name Nemesis is the first one of the match that's going to name David Elden.
Yeah.
We've had several naming Owen Turtenwald. We had one who didn't really have a name, and then this one is naming David Elden. And so, Owen back in a position where he is able to leverage an advantage here, as both players have a Stoneforge Mystic, both players have an Umezao's Jite, both players have a True Name Nemesis naming their opponent.
Yeah. I mean, David just needs a little more breathing space here. He can start gaining some life, but you know that Jite is going to move on to Owen's True Name Nemesis, presumably next turn. And next turn, that True Name Nemesis threatens 7 points of damage. I mean,
aha! How about a second copy of True Name Nemesis? Would that change things?
It doesn't. It doesn't. It still doesn't answer Owen's, and that's the critical thing here.
Still not flipping. But it is another True Name Nemesis.
Yeah, you might be able to just barely squeak this one out.
So Owen's at 12, David's at 6. These Jites are sort of canceling each other out in terms of life gain. They are going to kill pretty much everything else on the board, though. True Name Nemesis comes in, picks up a couple of counters of its own. David falls to 3, which means that the True Name Nemesis would be theoretically lethal, assuming David wants to kill a bunch of creatures. Doesn't look like he's going to do that. Instead, he drew Brainstorm. That's going to help him find some more options and clear out some of the stuff that he has in his hand that he doesn't really want anyway. Swords to Plowshares and Wasteland among the lands from the Brainstorm, as well as what looked like a Savannah, although it could have been a scrubland. Yeah, the green source that David runs is Tropical Island, not Savannah. So looked like a scrubland to me, although Tundra, scrubland, Savannah all sort of blend together at this angle from above the table. David taking an aggressive line here.
Can't win by blocking. He's got to try to basically win this game next turn.
So he's at a theoretical 11. The true name Nemesis is a theoretical 7-power creature, and the Swords to Plowshares is going to immediately turn the Delver of Secrets into a farmer itself.
Has David forgotten about the Batter Skull?
It's possible that he did, and there is the Batter Skull.
I mean, this is a huge swing here for Owen now. Gets a lot of breathing room. Getting that 4 on top of the counters he's getting from the Jite means that David's attack on the way back isn't lethal.
Owen top decked a Lightning Bolt, by the way.
Yeah.
And so should David try to kill this 4/4 with 4 Jite tokens, Lightning Bolt is going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
These counters on this Jite are severely overworked this turn.
Right, and part of the problem is, we're at somewhat parity in terms of the Jite tokens, but with Owen threatening lethal, it's incumbent on David to use his first, and then Owen gets to react accordingly, whether David tries to attack Owen's creatures in combat or just gain life or whatever the case may be. Bolt's a huge draw here too.
Yeah, Bolt really changes a lot of the math here. And so all 3 of Owen's creatures are going to enter the red zone. It appears as if David has an activation of his own, and there's a Snapcaster Mage. There are 3 copies of Swords to Plowshares in David's sideboard.
I suspect this is not going to get to resolve. I think. Are there 2 dazes in Owen's hand, or just the 1?
I think there's just the 1 daze. And so Snapcaster Mage is going to enter the battlefield, and it's going to target a Swords to Plowshares.
There's a big question on whether this is even going to be allowed to block here, as Owen can again just shoot it down with the Jite before blocks.
Now the other thing is that he can use the daze here to make it so that it's just an Ambush Viper, that it's just a 2/1 blocker.
Yeah, that plow is almost certainly not resolving this turn.
Well, the plow certainly isn't. It's questionable that it's even going to be cast.
Yeah.
It appears as if Owen's going to use his counters before the swords is targeted, so that he can't target his own sword. And the Tiago Chan lookalike hits the bin. I believe the stack is now empty, with the Swords to Plowshares already been targeted. And we are back to where we were before, just with 1 less Jite counter for Owen's true name Nemesis. So 4/4 lifelink vigilance, 1/2 with no abilities, and 3/1 protection from David Elden with a Jite with a counter on it. And David's going to go down to 2 here to fetch. And these Swords to Plowshares is going to target the Batter Skull token. That is going to get dazed. So the Batter Skull is still coming into the red zone.
And again, this is a 2 lethal attackers coming across right now for Owen.
David really needs to, well, I guess he's got no way to not let Owen gain life.
Yeah, no, he's going to gain. This true name Nemesis is going to connect in, and this Batter Skull is coming across.
Looks like Jite is going to gain 2 life at a time, going up to 6. Owen has 4 damage sitting on David right now. Owen's going to go to 11. David goes back down to 2 with 2 counters on the Jite. Owen now is going to go to 11 and get 2 more counters on his Jite of his own.
And critically, this means that David does not have lethal on board, as he has only 10 damage coming across, 4 from the Jite and 6 from the copies of True Name Nemesis.
And another True Name Nemesis is going to enter play for Owen Turtenwald. That one is also going to name David Elden.
This has been a lot of back and forth in this game.
And it looks like that's a wasteland. So David is unable to finish off Owen this turn, it would appear, as he has a theoretical 10 power in play. Owen is at 11 with 3 more counters on that Jite. And it looks like only the one True Name Nemesis is going to enter the red zone right now. 3 damage to Owen Turtenwald. He's going to fall to 8. 4 counters, again, will be on David Elden's Jite.
And I believe that, particularly with especially now with the bolt in hand, that Owen has this more than covered on the way back.
Yes.
Just by pumping his True Name Nemesis. As David can only get up to 10, his best block is on the Batterskull token, and he has 3, 6, 7, plus 6, 13, 16 from the bolt. So, the fact that David didn't move his Jite onto his True Name Nemesis, I'm sure is giving Owen some cause for pause here, but
and True Name Nemesis is going to stand in front of the Batterskull. So 4, 5, 6, 7 right now, damage coming through to David Elden. He can gain 8 to go to 10, then fall back to 7. And assuming that that was a lightning bolt in Owen Turtenwald's hand, that should be the match. Now, if it was, nope, doesn't look like he had anything there. It was a Grim Lavamancer in Owen's hand, actually.
Wow. Really impressively navigated game there by Owen Turtenwald.
Yeah, absolutely.
That one looked pretty bleak and a pretty hateful matchup as well. And Owen Turtenwald wins 2 games to 1, advancing to 6-1.